Well, I decided to have hopefully again, a quick video. We had a little bit of an incident last week. I had turned on all the water faucets outside, the shut off valve to all our faucets front and back outside, and I didn't realize that the front faucet turn off shut off valve was dripping water after I closed the closet. And there was a bin of Hardy Boys books, a rubber red tote full of Hardy Boys books that I had just finished lending to a friend for their kids to read, all 58. And this shut off valve was right above that tote. So the tote, after 4 or 5 days, was basically completely full of water. So all my Hardy Boys books got soaking wet. They're pretty much, well, I'm not going to say they're ruined. So I left them out to dry. I put all the books like this for 5 days. Our basement's extremely dry. Um, the water table behind our house or below our house is very low because, of course, there's a ravine. There's a 60-foot ravine right behind our house. So there's not much of a damp basement here. So I left them out like that for a week, I guess 4 or 5 days. I can't remember when it happened. I think it was last weekend. But anyway, it doesn't matter. And most of them were mostly dry. Forget these guys up front. I'll talk about those in a second. But the ones back there were mostly dry. These ones are still sopping wet, and I don't know why. It's different paper. I mean, they're all set up exactly the same as the other ones, but they're still very, very damp. Whereas those ones, I mean, I paged through them. So from here all the way over here, paged through them, and they're dry. But because, when paper gets wet, it kind of goes like that, or sometimes get really bad and looks like that. So what I did, while they were 98% dry, I decided to stuff them between these two walls here of my shelf, and hopefully they'll compress a little bit. I won't leave them in there for too long, just in case there's enough dampness to create mold, but I'm going to leave them in there for a couple weeks. They're legible. Sometimes the blue on top, there's blue on top of the book. Most of the Hardy Boys books in the old days came like that, so you can see the blues come down into the page after getting wet. Can't help that. C'est la vie. And so while I was working on this, I decided to take a video and show you my entire Hardy Boys book collection. Now, I started reading Hardy Boys probably way back in single digits. My dad had 3 of them. He had this one, The Ghost of Skeleton Rock. He had The Missing Chums, and one that is still wet, which is very odd. Where is it? Yeah, that's right, The Missing Chums. So my dad gave me this book when I was a kid. You can see it's got his signature right there. So those are the first 3 Hardy Boys books I ever got. And then I started getting them for birthdays. The Tower Treasures, #1 through whatever. My friend Paul Illick, back in the day, back in grade school, we both loved Hardy Boys, and we would buy each other Hardy Boys books for his birthdays and stuff. And so gradually, I started getting, and my brother, Brian, also read them. So he got Hardy Boys books too when we were kids. And they were all in our bookshelf in our bedroom. But I think around 10 or 11, 12 maybe, we stopped getting them, and I started buying them. I would go over to the bookstore at Eastgate, ride my bike down there, and buy whichever one I didn't have. So I actually, at the end of it all, before I got into my mid-teens or late teens, I had every single Hardy Boys book, 1 through 58, the originals, including the coveted The Hardy Boys Detective Handbook. Dun, dun, dun. so I had them all, and they sat in the shelf, and they sat in boxes when I did a lot of moving. And we lent them out to friends who wanted to borrow them for the kids. And then they just came back in the tote, and I put them in the closet, and then turned on the shut-off valve, and my poor Hardy Boys books got soaking wet. There are some that are barely touched. I guess they're on the top of the tote. Some were completely submerged. That's why probably these ones are completely soaked still. These are at the bottom. C'est la vie. We'll see what happens when they dry. I mean, they're readable. I can't sell them now. Not that I was ever going to sell them, but they're not in nice condition anymore. They're going to be in pretty piss poor condition. They're going to be legible. They're going to be, fine. I mean, you can read that when the page is dry. It wasn't dirty water. It was fresh, clean water from the tap. So I'm just sad because this is from my dad. I mean, the guy's still around, but still, I mean, this thing is older than me, this book. actually a couple years back when Sandy and I started going around to all these flea markets and stuff, I found other kind of tomes. So this is books 1 through 3, 1, 2, and 3, and one. I never saw that before, so I grabbed that from an. And then these guys too, with the paper covers and the hard covers. I actually have one of the later books, which I would never. I think I read this when I was not interested at all. It wasn't captivating my interest. But I actually have started finding the older versions like my dad's. And so I pick them up, and this was like $9 or whatever down there in the little place in Virgil. So we keep on finding the older ones. And so that was what I was doing. Every time I stopped by a flea market or whatever, I would see if I can find any of the original Hardy Boys books. So now I got 4 good ones and 3 bad ones. My 3 original from my dad, which were good until they got soaking wet. So what are you going to do? But I'll still keep on doing that. And if any of these are really bad, I'm just going to make a list and keep it in my wallet. And when I visit these yard sales or flea markets or even go to Value Village, I'm going to replace every one of those that's really, really damaged with something from the same era, because the newer books are not the same. If you have a Hardy Boys book that has this blue bar at the top, it's a newer edition. If it doesn't have the white at the top, I mean, if it has blue at the top, it's even a newer edition, because they have from I think the 50s to the 70s, or the 80s, they had the blue in the top, the painted blue, and then they started publishing without the blue in the top. Most of mine have blue in the top with the paint, but as you can see, this is another blue bar at the top and white, so it's a newer book. As a matter of fact, let's look at the publication date in this thing. 1965. It doesn't have a later one. Maybe I always thought that bar meant it was newer than, say, this guy. You can see they changed. I mean, it's the same book inside, but 16. Then you got the blue bar and the Hardy Boys, and then they had this. This is an older book, if I remember correctly. And then they even did this. So they changed every couple years. They changed how they published these books. The inside they updated and whatever. I mean, it's not like this guy, which is extremely old, and it's got my dad's name in it. But I think this is. I don't know when this was published. I don't think it has a date on it. A couple missing pages. 1928. 1928, this book. My dad had it. I don't know how he got it. I never asked him. But he remembers reading when he was a kid, when he came to Canada. So this is one of the ones I got at the flea market. And let's see what this is. 1951. So 1928, 1951. So anyway, I've always liked my Hardy Boys books. I remember most of the stories. My favorite is the Shattered Helmet, number 52. I read that one at least a dozen times when I was a kid. But I think I read each one of these books at least 3 or 4 times when I was growing up, because they are good and they're fun to read. I remember a couple plots. Frank and Joe having a good time solving mysteries. Their dad Fenton, their aunt, everybody, their buddies Chet and Tony, the girls that they would date and go out in their boat, the Sleuth. I love these books growing up. I don't think, I've never felt nostalgic enough to actually pick one up lately to reread it. But it was always nice to have that little bit of thing in the back of my head that I owned them. And so when I would see them in a store, I said, I own that. And I'll still have that, because every one of these books is salvageable, although not sellable as a nice set. But again, as I said, I wasn't planning on selling them anyway. And now I got something else to do when I go to the flea market, is replace all the really bad ones. So I hope everybody's doing well. I thought you guys would appreciate this. And I'll talk to you guys all later. Take care. Bye.